I call the Honourable Minister Simon Powell.
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that we had just had 3 calls in a row from Leanne Dalzell, and it's only appropriate that she wasn't interrupted, given she's formerly been a Minister of Commerce and has chaired the committee, and I think that has chaired it on this particular piece of work in a way which indicates not only does she understand what's going on, because she was there as the Minister when a lot of these things that she describes occurred, but she has been determined in her discussions with me about amendments and other things to this legislation. I appreciate that. I also, frankly, think that the comments that she made with respect to the chair of the Establishment Board will be welcomed by him. Could I just briefly talk about the next step that the member referred to, and that is around the securities legislation, which is still to be drafted, but an exposure bill will be released in August for all those who are interested in the detail of this particular piece of work to go through it in some detail. I persuaded myself that although it was an extra step, because it's such technical work, I would rather the bulk of that work was done at the exposure bill stage rather than at the time that it goes to the committee. I suspect that will inform the working of the committee by the time we get the bill to it, hopefully prior to the House lifting in October for the end of the year. In fact, I'm determined that that'll be the case. But I do think, although it does slow it slightly, it's an essential step. Now, my view is that the principles outlined in the Members' Amendment fit more squarely with the securities law discussion rather than the Financial Markets Authority. I'm not saying they'll go in, I'm saying that there's an opportunity. We'll oppose this amendment in this bill, but the government will oppose this amendment in this bill. But there is an opportunity for further discussion, and I'd be happy to have that discussion with the member at the time of the exposure bill coming forward in August, I think is the time from memory. Just on the celebrity endorsement point, this was slightly overlooked actually in the reporting of this issue. And that is what the Cabinet paper says from memory is that the issue of celebrity endorsement is subject to a further report to the government, which we will get in May. Okay, so the media actually ran the story as though this was a done arrangement. That is not the case. The Cabinet's asked for further advice about the practicalities of regulating in this particular area. So we'll know more about that in May. Now, although the chair of the Select Committee looked at me slightly quizzically when I was talking about Part 1 establishing the FMA, of course it's the purposes of Parts 1 to 4 that are contained in Part 1. And I just wanted to talk briefly about the establishment of the Financial Markets Authority. The Financial Markets Authority, or the FMA as it's become known, will replace the Securities Commission and take on certain functions of the Ministry of Economic Development, including those of the Government Actuary. It will be an independent Crown entity that, in the same way as the Commerce Commission, carries out its functions independently. Now, that level of independence, and this is an important point, accords with international norms for securities regulators. The FMA's functions will include promoting the confident and informed participation of business, investors and consumers, and that will be done by the issuing of warnings, reports and guidelines and so on. One of the functions to promote awareness by investors that in all investment involves risks, and it is not the role of the Financial Markets Authority to remove those risks. It is the role of the Financial Markets Authority to monitor compliance with and investigation and enforcement of financial markets legislation. It will also perform these functions in respect of governance. It will regulate financial advisors, securities trustees and statutory supervisors and auditors. This is a really important point because one of the things that we saw at the time of many of these finance company collapses were various regulators and oversight bodies staring at each other as these particular agencies decided that because their legislation was restrictive and prescriptive, they did not have responsibility for the oversight and enforcement of the investment product that was being designed in some cases to be precisely outside of the Securities Act legislation to avoid any independent scrutiny, enforcement or oversight by a regulator. What this particular mechanism of bringing these entities together does is take away those gaps. So I've referred previously to the fact, Mr Chairman, that as the money hit the floor, and let's not undersell it, we're talking about billions of New Zealand taxpayer dollars, investments, hitting the floor, the regulators sat and stared at each other and said things euphemistically like, well, we're not sure that we've got statutory responsibility to oversee this particular part of the transaction, or our legislation doesn't allow us to intervene on this particular point because it's very prescriptive about what type of product is a security for the purposes of the securities legislation. This body will remove the notion of that fracturing of regulatory oversight, and if nothing else, that is the most significant component part of this work, and that is to give investors, and for that matter designers and innovators of product that is going to the market, a one-stop shop to have discussion with the regulator and the enforcer and overseer of the market. Now, I use that distinction deliberately because often when issuers of product or producers of product are thinking about going to market, they won't want to talk to the regulator for fear of the enforcement side becoming part of their discussions rather than the regulatory side of the operation. And that is an important distinction. And the FMA will be much closer to the market and the design of those products than its predecessors. That is a really important consideration. The Market Intelligence Unit that will be contained within the Financial Markets Authority is designed to be close to the producer, the public issuer, the person who is taking, or the company that is taking product to market. Also, when we get into the detail of the bill, it's worth just putting out this particular power. For too long, because of the prescriptive nature of some of this legislation, product has been designed specifically to fall outside legislative and securities markets legislation oversight. That will change with the FMA being given the power to deem a product to be a security for the purposes of oversight and supervision and jurisdiction in a way that will force, in some respects, those who are taking product to market to talk to the regulator at the appropriate time to ensure that everybody understands exactly what is going to market. Now, we cannot take away risk. The legislative arm of this government cannot take away risk from these products, from investors, and nor should we try to. But the point here is enforcement and supervision has to come with power and a comprehensive oversight, and my view is this bill, this authority will do that. There is still work to be done on the securities legislation, and that work is well underway.
I call the honourable member Child.